She did not know when she met Bertolt Brecht how their meeting would mark her life. She would be involved in the creation of some of the greatest dramas the 20th century would produce. She would move among the stars of Hollywood, while her every movement would be haunted by the FBI, suspecting her of Soviet espionage. Brecht became the love of her life.
Once in Denmark, Bertolt Brecht and I looked up at the night sky together. "Do you see that W?" he asked. "The 5 stars of Cassiopeia. There our eyes will always meet." We kissed under Cassiopeia. A tentative, heavenly, light kiss. An eternal kiss.
She could not know that her journey would end violently and alone in Cold War Berlin.
I think that the greatest shock that Ruth Berlau ever got was not really in the hospital with electroshock treatments. I think it was from Bertolt Brecht.
When Ruth Berlau met German playwright Bertolt Brecht, she was working on her own novel on women's rights. She was well known in Denmark for her travels abroad as a reporter, as the leader of a workers' theatre, and as a popular actress at the Royal Theatre, appearing with major stars. Her achievements were highly unusual considering the limited opportunities for women at the time and her almost complete lack of formal education. Ruth was born in Copenhagen in 1906. Her father became rich during the First World War, trading with Germany from neutral Denmark. The children were dressed in furs and attended a private school. But behind the facade was a nightmare. Ruth's father drank heavily and physically abused his wife and daughters. By the time Ruth was 13, things had become desperate. Her mother attempted to gas herself and slashed both wrists.
We came home. The whole apartment was full of blood. Of course, we stepped in the blood. The whole parquet floor was covered in blood. Then father arrived. He was drunk. And then he said one sentence, "This is the end, a scandal." After that, I was not able to see my father for 2 years.
Ruth's mother survived the suicide attempt, but the family was split up. Ruth left school at 13 so she could take odd jobs to support her mother and sister. She established a business, dealing in coffee beans, delivered to customers on her bicycle. At the age of 20, Ruth was eager to travel abroad and arranged with a Copenhagen paper, Ekstrabladet, to write reports on her bicycle trip to Paris. But the trip was very dull, so what she reported back was mostly fiction.
Crazy men shouted at me as I went along. A car tried to block me going by. I took my small revolver and fired a bullet into one of the car's rear tires. It blew up with a big bang that was music to my ears. After I'd written my final story, I was ready to return to Copenhagen. I'd written to tell the paper that I expected to reach the town hall square at 10 p.m. I came to the square to collect my pay, and a huge crowd was there. I asked a boy, "What is happening?" "Everything is happening," he said. "Ruth will be back tonight." A wonderful story, isn't it?
Ruth Berlau, now well known, married society doctor Robert Lund. A tolerant, worldly man, he was twice her age. She moved into his patrician apartment overlooking the royal garden to live with 2 of his children by a previous marriage. At the same time, she was admitted as an acting student to the Royal Danish Theatre. It was a happy, unrestricted marriage where they both were busy with their individual careers. They spent most of their summer traveling around Europe in the family Lincoln. At the age of 22, Ruth made another bicycle trip, this time to Moscow to study stage production there. She had made a deal with the national daily Politiken to report back. But when asked for negative reports, she refused. She liked the fact that women in the USSR seemed to have equal rights, rights that women lacked elsewhere.
When I returned to Denmark, I went by bicycle directly to the Communist Party office. I told the gentleman there I would like to have the little red book. He said, "It's not that easy. First we have to see what you can do." "I can do nothing," I said. "Then you cannot have the book," he said. One day the doorman at the fancy Royal Theatre called me in my dressing room. "I have 4 strange men standing here. They want to talk to you." I said he could send them right up. Into my room came 4 sailors who had written a play. They asked me to help them stage it. I said, "I don't know anything about ships." "That doesn't matter. We know these things," they said. Their play was put on with my help, and that was the start of my workers' theatre.
RT, RT, viser arbejdere i deres verden. RT, RT, viser arbejdere i deres verden. Soldater i arbejdernes armé. Det hvad vi RT.
At home, the Lunt family lived 2 lives. Through the front door, high society friends came to dinner parties with the Berlau Lunts, while up the back stairs came a stream of people related to the Communist Party, as well as Berlau's worker actors. In early 1933, the Revolutionary Theatre was invited to Moscow for an international theatre festival. Berlau's group won a first prize in Moscow, where the name of Stalin increasingly drowned all others, while the threat of Hitler and fascism was steadily growing in the West. By the end of February 1933, Hitler was in full power in Berlin. The German Parliament building was set on fire. The Reichstag fire was used by Hitler to initiate a witch hunt against any potential opposition. Among the many thousands who fled were the left-wing playwright Bertolt Brecht, famous for the Threepenny Opera, and his Jewish wife, the actress Helene Weigel. They settled on the little Danish island of Thurø with their 2 children. In Copenhagen, Ruth was anxious to obtain new material. When she learnt that Brecht and Weigel had fled to Denmark, she made the journey to Thurø to meet them.
The first thing I noticed about Brecht was his eyes. Clear, dark, expressive, smiling eyes. He gave me his hand but took one step backwards. Distance, for God's sake, distance. Not only in his work did he need distance, but also in his private life. Brecht was very funny, and I was too. I didn't know then I already loved him.
What she did know was that she wanted his plays for her revolutionary theatre. Though he had only one copy of the play, The Mother, she stole it in order to translate it into Danish.
When I left Brecht, after our first meeting, he stood on a green hill outside his house. I shouted to him, "Don't forget my address." He patted the pocket next to his heart. No, it's right here. His eyes and his laughter followed me all the way to Copenhagen, as well as the stolen book.
Ruth began translating and rehearsing Brecht's play in Copenhagen. She also used her position in the Royal Theatre to set up rehearsals there of the translation of St. Joan of the Stockyards. One of her comrades at the Revolutionary Theatre, Dagmar Andreasen, recalls.
De gik og skabede sig bagved den frække hekse, og nu begynder hun altså også at bruge hele vores scene her, og altså hvem har givet hende lov til det og sådan noget.
Den heks, du taler om det.
Det var Ruth Berlau, ikke? For hun var jo aktør på Det Kongelige Teater endnu på den tid, ikke? Men hun havde jo gjort sig meget populær ved at hænge et rødt flag op på det Kongelige Teater, og det passede jo ikke alle de der skuespillere, der var med der, for at sige det pænt, ikke?
Hvor havde hun hængt det røde flag op her?
Oppe i toppen af teateret. Og det var jo altså sådan lidt af en, skal vi sige, en avisbegivenhed, ikke?
Brecht now relied on Ruth as the person who arranged translations and productions of the plays in Scandinavia. He needed her input, both with new plays and with old ones. And she was happy to help. She believed she'd found the equality in work and love that she sought within the communist movement. One of the world's leading Brecht scholars, Professor John Fuji from the University of Maryland.
The way Brecht always operated, he did this for half a century practically, was there's a definite pattern to the way he would operate. He would find somebody, usually a woman, usually either an actress or a writer, and he would immediately establish a sexual relationship with that person. And then he would start to utilize their talents and would use their material in the plays that then make him world famous. It's a standard pattern for him.
On tour, the group around Brecht was noticed, especially because Ruth Berlau was a well-known personality in Denmark.
Og så kom jo så fru Ruth Berlau, når vi nåede frem til den tid der, ikke? Og hende blev der jo rigtig kigget på, for hun var kongelig skuespillerinde, kom hertil. Og hun kom kørende på en stor motorcykel. Og det var vi slet ikke vant til, sådan en smart dame kom på en motorcykel. Men hun var så flink, så flink. Ja, det var hun. Og så lagde hun sig jo ind her ovenpå, ved siden af mig her, ved siden af slagteren, som nu slagteren har fortalt om der.
Kom Brecht nogensinde herop?
Ja, ja, det gjorde han. Han løb der heroppe ad trappen, og det var flere gange der.
Men vi snakker aldrig med ham.
Nej.
Og sagde ikke noget.
Hvad vil det sige, flere gange om dagen?
Ja, jeg kom løb på et formiddag og etmiddag og kom løb lige på øjeblik.
Men de ikke har gjort det, hvis de havde sådan en sød Peter op der.
De satte jo og
Jeg
skrev
ved da ikke
noget.
lige, hvad de laver, vel? Hvor skulle de vide det fra?
Kunne I ikke høre det?
Jo.
Tror jeg, vi var helt dumme.
During her stay on Turö, Ruth Berlau worked on a book called Every Animal Can Do It. She asked for Brecht's help, and she got it, but he disapproved of it because of its story of men's inability to commit themselves to genuinely loving relationships.
How can a conversation about love happen between a woman who has jumped into the water from a burning, sinking ship and a man who is still standing up on the deck? even if he jumped after her, even if he could swim. How could he save her?
Because of its biographical frankness and sexual explicitness, she published the book under the pen name Maria Steen. Brecht saw the book as an unfair critique of men's behavior. In December 1933, Ruth Berlau got a call from Brecht. Could she pick up 25-year-old Margareta Steffin at the Copenhagen railway station and provide a home for her in her flat? Margareta Steffin was fleeing from the Nazis in Germany. Ruth did as she was asked.
Well, first of all, Steffin was a writer, a Berlin writer, one of the very few proletarian writers that Brecht ever came in contact with. And she began writing with Brecht in Berlin, began sleeping with Brecht in Berlin. It was typical that there would be both a sexual relationship and a working relationship. At times I joke and say that Brecht is one of the only major male writers I know who slept his way to the top. She was essential to plays, the great plays written in the immigration period. Great plays like Mother Courage and Galileo are unthinkable without Steffin. However, as her tuberculosis got worse, as it was neglected very frequently, Brecht's sexual interest in her dropped, and gradually she was replaced by the still healthy and very beautiful Ruth Berlau.
In Copenhagen, Ruth's husband, Professor Lundt, discovered that Steffin needed treatment for a spreading case of tuberculosis. Later, despite the danger of the cold and the damp from the sound for a TB patient, Brecht brought Steffin to Skodsborg Strand. She stayed at the pension Stella Maris, 4 minutes' drive from the house he and Helene Weigel had bought.
Og de blev kaldt sekretær, alle damerne, der var. Jeg tænkte, det var så fint. Og det var, tænker jeg, der er en lille gebuk der.
Margareta Steffin and Ruth Berlau made the new plays possible. They originated ideas, did the research, and then drafted scenes for plays which made Brecht famous. The Life of Galileo, Fear and Misery of the Third Reich, Mother Courage and Her Children, Frau Karra's Rifles, The Good Woman of Szechuan. While the Playwright Collective worked to create the theatre of the future, they faced an immediate threat to their existence, as Hitler might overrun Denmark at any moment. Steffin made a dangerous trip to Moscow to see whether the group could escape there. But she realized that most of their friends there had been arrested and executed by an increasingly paranoid Stalin. After returning to Denmark, Steffin wrote in her diary,
I'm all for escaping to America as quickly as possible, if that can still be done.
Brecht, Weigel, their children and Steffin fled to Sweden and then to far-off Finland, while they waited anxiously for American visas. Ruth remained in Copenhagen, where she got an amicable divorce and continued doing what she felt she did best, working for the Royal Theatre and doing underground work with members of the Revolutionary Theatre Group. She was still in Copenhagen when the city was seized by the Nazis on April the 9th, 1940. A letter arrived from Brecht. He spoke openly of love and asked her to join him for when our times will come. She hesitated. Her choices were either to go into hiding and try to continue the struggle, or leave family and homeland to rejoin Brecht.
One night after my performance, when I returned home to my apartment, I found it had been all smashed up by the Nazis. Then the party said I must leave the country.
Ruth Berlau made her decision. She left her ex-husband and the children behind and joined Bertolt Brecht, his wife and his mistress, in Moscow. At this time, Margareta Steffin wrote in her diary,
I'm now a tiny piece of dirt. I must have had a wonderful time before I became a piece of dirt.
As the war spread across Europe, the group had to cross the Soviet Union in order to reach the boat for America. As the only Russian speaker, Steffin had to summon all her last remaining strength to arrange the escape. Ironically, however, after she'd got them through the Soviet bureaucracy, she was left behind in Moscow as the rest fled on the Trans-Siberian Express.
Brecht was terrified of Moscow. His closest friends in Moscow were all dead or in prison, arrested by the KGB. And so he was terrified and needed absolutely to get out of there and to get off to capitalist America, where he would be safe. And so leaving Steffin behind was part of the deal, that he was willing to pay that price. And from a KGB perspective, having somebody who was very close left behind was very good, because as long as she was alive, she was a hostage to ensure that he would behave himself correctly in America. But at this point, you look at photographs of her and you see that she is so desperately ill.
One day a telegram arrived that she had died. For 4 days, Brecht did not smile. I offered him my compartment. I had one for me alone. But Weigel said, "Why? He'll soon forget."
The loss of Steffin was immediately felt by Ruth. On the journey to America, Brecht wanted Ruth to take over Steffin's work.
I was to type a clean copy of an essay for Brecht. I sat there in my cabin, really trying. But typing clean copies was the worst thing for me. I was glad when we reached Los Angeles and I could stop.
Immediately upon Brecht's arrival in America, he was able to count on the support of wealthy fellow exiles from the old Berlin days. The actor Peter Lorre, the director Fritz Lang, and best-selling novelist Leon Feuchtwanger and his wife Martha. The Brecht-Weigel family was provided with a furnished house. Ruth, however, had to find herself a place close to Brecht's and look for whatever odd jobs she could get. She also began writing a screenplay on the heroic figure of Joan of Arc. Her version was set in Nazi-occupied France and was titled Simone Machard. She later worked on it with Brecht and Leon Feuchtwanger.
We worked very closely together to create the Simone Machard story. I believe I was the one who wrote the first version of it. And when Feuchtwanger saw it, he very quickly did a small novel, Simone Machard.
A contract was signed for Simone Machard to divide any profits whenever it was sold, either as a play or as a movie. The agreement was completely clear. Bertolt Brecht was to have 35%, Leon Feuchtwanger 30%, Ruth Berlau 20%, and Martha Feuchtwanger 15% of incoming revenues.
We got our hands on them finally of what they were, but the way Brecht used to operate with agreements was that he would always keep one person guessing about what the other one was doing. And so now he's got Ruth to sign one agreement. If he took that agreement to MGM, MGM would say, well, where's Ruth Berlau? Does she agree to this? So the next thing he does is he signs another agreement now with Feuchtwanger, where it's just the two of them signing the agreement. And then in the agreement, he says he will then take care of Ruth Berlau. But because Ruth doesn't even know this agreement exists, she has no way of knowing when they've sold it. It's a trick. But it's a standard Brecht trick. He did it his whole life. He did it with everybody.
Brecht was still with Weigel and working on typical Hollywood movies. Ruth was often angry about Brecht's bourgeois lifestyle, which, she told him, was inconsistent with his Marxist theories. She wanted to be more active in helping the resistance effort against Hitler. She did not think this could really be done in Hollywood. In New York, Ruth got a job with the US Office of War Information, broadcasting back to occupied Denmark. She and a Danish co-worker, Ida Backman, took a flat together on New York's 57th Street. And almost daily, Brecht wrote special delivery letters. He signed them over and over with the code letter D, meaning I belong to you.
I could now receive Brecht properly. Now there was a chance of his coming, and I sent him a key to my apartment. I asked him to plan his trip right away.
In New York, they worked together, arranging to get English versions done of earlier plays for Broadway and developing the Caucasian Chalk Circle, a play about human relations in an ideal communist society of the future. By the time of Brecht's first visit to Ruth in New York, the FBI had begun to investigate him as a potential communist spy, and from here onwards put Berlau herself under observation. The legendary FBI boss J. Edgar Hoover was now able to follow Berlau and Brecht round the clock.
At the same time, he has taps set up, for instance, in motel rooms where Berlau was going to meet Brecht. And he particularly liked information of that sort. Whenever she traveled, the FBI would be along, and they would go through all her things in the baggage car. They examined everything. And they also got the supervisor at her apartment in New York to go in and look through all her things. And so Ruth Berlau never had a moment of privacy from that first moment of being tapped on until she left the United States. She was always under surveillance.
J. Edgar Hoover was convinced that Ruth Berlau was a communist spy, and he had her fired from her job at the Office of War Information. From now on, the FBI would ensure that she got no similar kind of job. Though her situation was very difficult, it was, as her friend Eric Bentley points out, often hard to tell.
She had these wonderful looks, and although we know from the inner history she didn't have total self-control at all times, often she did. I mean, when I saw her, she did. She was very poised and very alert and very intelligent, and it was as if nothing had ever gone wrong.
Meanwhile, in California, the Simone Machar story was sold to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer for $50,000, of which Ruth was legally entitled to $10,000. A sum best understood if we realize that it was 4 times what she had earned per year in New York, or would have been enough to buy the Feuchtwanger Villa, an enormous estate facing the Pacific Ocean. Though the Simone Machar agreement specified Brecht agrees to cover out of his share all claims that Ruth Berlau may have, he did not give her her $10,000. Instead, he kept the money for himself. One of those present at the time was Leon Feuchtwanger's secretary, Hilde Waldo. She clearly remembers when the agreement was signed.
Goldwyn bought all the rights. It came very, very handy. And Brecht bought the house they lived in. And one day I came to see them, and there was a little dog I'd never seen before, a white one. And Brecht said we had him washed. The dog should know too that we are rich now. But somebody once inquired if Berlau really had a share, And we sent him the copy of the contract. It's in there, so and so.
She never got it.
She didn't? That's not right.
She was never paid this money. In fact, we know from the records of the area, the records of real estate companies, we know exactly what happened to the money. He used it to pay off his house in Santa Monica.
Now Ruth was dependent on $75 a month from the divorce from Robert Lunt and whatever money Brecht sent her from his sale of their joint projects.
In the middle of November 1943, Brecht came to New York for 4 months. We worked together on the Caucasian chalk circle. At that time I got pregnant with Brecht. I was very happy, and Brecht was too, even though he made extreme efforts to keep my condition secret.
The play was almost ready when, on September the 3rd, 1944, Ruth was rushed to the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital for an emergency tumor operation, and the baby was delivered by caesarean section.
And he lived. He really lived. Then one day, the doctor came. A wonderful doctor provided by Peter Lorre. I could only see his tie. He sat down on my bed. He said, "There is something I must tell you." I said, "I already know. Mikkel has died." Then Brecht said, "Why be so sad? When we get to Berlin, we will immediately adopt a child. So many children without fathers, without mothers." Oh, yeah.
Claiming poverty, Brecht had her leave the hospital before she had recovered. He spent $40 on cremating Mikkel and bought Ruth some new clothes.
After a short while, Brecht thought we could make love again. The first time, all that he said was, "Oh, Ruth."
Back in New York, usually unpaid, she worked to promote the plays for production there. She was often overwhelmed by waves of depression. We know from the FBI files that she sought companionship at a Danish sailors' home in Lower Manhattan, where she met a man who seemed genuinely interested in her. When he had to return to Denmark, her depression worsened. Ida Bachmann was deeply worried about her friend's condition. Ruth was drinking heavily, having told Brecht about her affair. Bachmann wrote,
"One afternoon, around the 19th or 20th of December, I returned home to find her in what can only be described as ecstasy. She saw the whole truth. Now, I told the master the truth. I know that this is going to cost my life," she said. "I'm going to die." At that time, it was impossible for me to see if it was her vivid imagination, as I always admired, and her sometimes brilliant intelligence that was at work, or whether she had lost control. The ideas came storming into her mind. She nearly talked me out of my wits. She began reading the Bible in order to find everybody portrayed in it. You were Jesus Christ, later King Solomon. She herself was first Joan of Arc, then Virgin Mary, Maria Magdalena, and finally, the Revolution.
25th of March, 1946. The last thing I remember is that I told Brecht on the phone, everything is not in order. I thought that I had been locked up behind an iron curtain among the insane, not for weeks or months, but for years. Lust is still the strongest feeling. I am in love. In love. I am jealous. Jealous like hell. Hell is burning throughout my body. The devils of Satan are pulling me to pieces. Nearly a whole year has disappeared. They tell me it is because of the electric shock treatments. Diagnosis, schizophrenia, psychosis. Brecht, arrived from California.
Because Ida Backman had returned to Denmark while Ruth was receiving shock treatment, Brecht now had to take her back to California with him. She now moved back and forth between the two coasts, finally returning to California in 1947. At that time, she began to make a photographic record of Galileo, then in rehearsal at the Coronet Theatre in Santa Monica, with the great star Charles Laughton in the lead. Having lost the baby, somehow the plays she worked on with Brecht were her children now, and she was determined to have a photographic record of every moment of them.
She worked very hard at that project. Too hard for some people's taste. Charles Laughton thought she was a pain in the neck, doing it all the time, and he threatened to kill her. He said, when she did that in the theater in New York, every few seconds it'd go click. He said, if I hear that click once more, I'll kill you with my bare hands.
Not content with just the click-click of individual moments, she got a small movie camera and shot the entire play.
It was just a film of a performance taken with one camera in a rigid position, stationary. So it's terrible as a film. But Brecht insisted on doing it. He had to have a record of this important occasion, you see. So I suppose it's still there. Be the rarest Charles Laughton item in movie history.
No. The gulf between you and humanity might even grow so wide that the sound of your cheering at some new achievement could be echoed by a universal howl of horror.
While Charles Laughton was portraying a man threatened by the Inquisition, the House Un-American Activities Committee set up its own version of the Inquisition.
Calling the House Un-American Activities Committee to order, Chairman J. Parnell Thomas of New Jersey opens an inquiry into possible communist penetration of the Hollywood film industry.
My name is Bertolt Brecht.
Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party of any country?
I was not a member, or am not a member of any communist party.
Your answer is that you have never been a member of the Communist Party?
That is correct.
The problem isn't whether or not he said yes or no. It was the problem of answering at all, because the strategy of the Communist Party at the hearings was that nobody was to answer the questions. Because if nobody answered and said yes or no, then HUAC had no way of knowing whether or not a person was or was not a party member. When Brecht answered, this was a direct betrayal of the other people who were coming to Washington with him, his colleagues in the scriptwriting community of Hollywood. It's part of a pattern that when he is frightened, he is willing to throw anybody else overboard in order for him to get away.
The day after the hearing, Brecht flew to Europe. I stayed behind in America. I was supposed to wait for the New York production of Galileo.
As Ruth finished her work on Galileo in New York, Brecht begged her to join him. He said, "Alone or almost alone, one cannot have an existence there. You are going to be unbelievably needed in Berlin." She agreed to join him, this time in Berlin at the height of the Soviet blockade. Together they rehearsed the play Mother Courage. Weigel played the lead, Brecht directed, and Ruth made directing suggestions and took thousands of photos of a production that helped change theatre history. But life was very difficult for Ruth. They had returned home to a foreign country, a country that up to this moment had been the home of the enemy.
Bei Ruth immer in der Hoffnung, die von Brecht auch genährt wurde, dass, wenn sie in Berlin sind, eine Art Ehe hergestellt wird. Sie dachte nicht unbedingt an heiraten, aber sie dachte daran, dass Brecht mit ihr zusammen lebt und sie enger mit ihm zusammenarbeiten kann.
When the Berlin Ensemble started, 49 I suppose, when Brecht first got there, and he was living in the Adlon. That setup I saw, that is, I visited the Adlon, and Brecht and Weigel had a room or a suite, I think just a big room, and Ruth had a room on the same floor, but a few doors down. And it was at that time that I learned in a kind of touching way of how this triangle system didn't really work, at least for the women. That it was supposed to work because we were all Marxists and didn't believe in jealousy and that sort of thing. But actually there was plenty of jealousy all around, and Ruth didn't mind admitting to it.
Mother Courage opened in January 1949 and was an enormous international hit.
Bei der Premiere von der Mutter Courage, da gab es ja einen furchtbaren Knatsch zwischen Brecht und die Regierungsleute waren da, nicht wahr? Wurde Premiere gefeiert und die Berlau saß an einem Katzentisch, nicht wahr? Überall pries man die große Schauspielerin, die Weigel, nicht wahr? Wurden Lobreden auf sie gehalten. Und das muss eine Schauspielerin wie Ruth Berlau auch gekränkt haben. Und die saß am Katzentisch und trank dort einen Cognac nach dem anderen. Und dann soll sie sogar nicht wahr, die ganze Feierlichkeit unterbrochen haben. Nicht wahr? Und ist ausfällig geworden gegen die Weigel. Nicht wahr?
Ruth's jealousy increased when Weigel was made the head of the new theatre company and given an enormous budget to hire new staff.
Brecht in Berlin natürlich andere junge Leute hatte, Interessierte, sodass ein großes Team herzustellen war und Ruth allmählich aus diesem Team ausschied.
Working with the new staff members, Ruth had her production pictures published as model books. She lived by herself near the theatre. No effort was made to adopt the child Brecht had spoken of at the death of Mikkel. Brecht himself was busy with a number of new affairs with the young staff members at the ensemble.
Too many lies, horrible ones. And we were friends. Friends. Only Cassiopeia has survived all this. No dirt, no lies, no scorn can reach her. The cold calls to my burning lap. Uta has become superfluous. He's probably now off with Kati. He lifts up her skirt. A quick 1, 2, 3. Already he's buttoning up his trousers again. He has forgotten everything I taught him.
In March 1950, Ruth used some pills she said Brecht had left in her bed to make a suicide attempt, and Brecht had her taken to the secure ward at the charity hospital. From now on, her life in Berlin would be marked by many visits to such hospitals. From St. Joseph's Hospital in East Berlin, Berlau wrote to Isot Kilian, another Brecht lover who dealt with his correspondence.
The small trolleys with the electric shock equipment disappear into the 5 cells called the bunkers. As you can understand, I am very frightened. I'm given electrical shock treatments in the bunker without anyone to talk with. I feel myself falling down a pit. Please say if it would be better for me to return to Denmark where my former husband lives. He's a doctor. Do not show this letter to Brecht, or his hate will grow faster than the grass outside the bars on my window.
Ruth's frequent hospitalizations made her friends worry for her sanity. Had Ruth gone insane?
Da möchte ich also, wenn man sie wahnsinnig bezeichnet, da möchte ich doch sagen, da möchte ich doch mit dem Polonius aus Hamlet sagen, ist es gleich Wahnsinn, hat er doch Methode nicht. Ja.
In 1953, while Ruth was in Berlin, the workers, dissatisfied with their wages, rose up against the socialist government. On the day that Soviet tanks moved to crush the rebellion, Brecht pledged support for the government. He was then given the renovated Theater am Schiffbauerdamm as a permanent home for the ensemble. Ruth was again confined, and from her mental hospital she wrote,
"Finally and honestly tell me, do you want me?"
No reply.
"Give me my model book money deposited regularly."
He failed to do so, claiming he had no bank account.
Hardly any capitalist would have behaved like such a swine. Now you are superfluous. Get out. Posterity will certainly wonder about this.
We now have been able to get hold of the bank records. He had bank accounts everywhere. He had bank accounts in Switzerland that he'd been maintaining since before the war, and that meant he had hard currency, and he had hard currency at a time when it was worth a fortune in Eastern Europe. He was, by any measurement, he was a millionaire.
Now at the height of his wealth and fame, Brecht declared to Eric Bentley during a visit in 1956 that he had inherited the throne of German theatre. But behind the boast, Bentley saw the face of a man who was ill, who, like Galileo, trusted nobody around him. In 1956, Brecht suddenly died. And even then he maintained the drama of his life. Like the Roman emperors, he insisted on having a stiletto plunged through his breast after death. Brecht left behind him a tangle of conflicting contracts and testaments.
Soll in diesem Testament, soll alle seine Mitarbeiterinnen und Mitarbeiter, oder jedenfalls den größten Teil, die aktiv an seinen Stücken mitgearbeitet haben, die geschrieben haben für ihn, soll bedacht haben, auch mit Tantiemen. Und diese Mitarbeiterin, die das Testament abschrieb, hat ihn unterschreiben lassen, aber es versäumt, beim Notar beglaubigen zu lassen. Und bei der Testamentseröffnung fehlte die notarielle Beglaubigung und es war ungültig. Und Helene Weigel machte so als Ehefrau Brechts, die am längsten bei ihm ausgehalten hat, den ganzen Reibach.
Ruth was soon fired from the Berliner ensemble, and when she tried to collect the money owed to her from the Simone Marchard contract, her claim was rejected by Brecht's publisher. She was left with her memories and living on handouts from Helene Weigel. Ruth stayed in a Berlin divided as of 1961 by the wall. Now again struggling against convention, she tried with young friends to set up a genuine workers' theatre, until it was blocked by the government and by Brecht's heirs, who prevented their use of Brecht texts. Sometimes she travelled to lecture on epic theatre, and in Berlin did a number of interviews. Usually both lively and dignified in these appearances, she maintained the memory of a Brecht who was increasingly treated by the East German government as an official icon.
You know my misery, this deadly longing. I have held your shoulders in my hands. Ute cries, too shocked to really understand that you were here. You You battled.
On the night of January the 15th, 1974, in hospital for a general checkup, Ruth apparently fell asleep with a cigarette in her hand, and the room became an inferno. Ruth Berlau now lies buried in the same Berlin cemetery, but as far as possible away from the grave of the man she loved, not wisely, but too well.